Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm your host, Hannah Zuberi, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. You can watch us 24/7 on Muslim Network TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, and we're really grateful for you to be on this journey with us as we're exploring different aspects of the Bosnian genocide.
Your host, Hannah Zuberi. Welcome back.
Scientific advances in DNA identification over the past 15 years have helped war crime investigators document an unprecedented extent the massacre of 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys around Srebrenica in 1995. Yet, even as those technology advances have uncovered more damning evidence, many Bosnian Serbs have grown increasingly resolute in their denial of the incident. And it's not just the Bosnian Serbs. There are many aspects to this denial. Biased historical narratives, of course, have existed throughout history. The identification of the dead in Srebrenica demonstrates the ability of technological advances to produce a flood of factual information. Yet many are still waiting to either manipulate numbers, to detract from the matter at the hand, or outright deny factual information. Joining us today is Dr. Ermin Sinanovic. Dr. Ermin is currently the executive director at the Center of Islam in the Contemporary World at Shenandoah University and is the director of research and academic programs at the International Institute of Islamic Thought, IIT, where he's also directs the Fairfax Institute. Before joining IIT, he was an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. I'm really grateful to have Dr. Ermin here. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for being here today. You have a long scholarly bio, but I'd rather hear it from your own mouth. Tell us more about your work, what you publish, what you teach, and you're Bosnian yourself.
Yeah, so Salam Alikum, and thank you so much for inviting me to this program. It's really an honor to be here, and I thank you for the invitation and for your audience for tuning in and being with us today. So yeah, I am originally from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I was born in former Yugoslavia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina was one of the 6 republics of the former Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm. And then at the time of the secession of Bosnia and becoming independent in 1992, the war broke out in Bosnia. Bosnia was attacked by Serbia and Montenegro, as well as faced by the attacks from the local Bosnian Serb population that basically sought to carve out parts of Bosnia for Serbia under the Greater Serbia project. And the main victims of that project were the Bosniaks, or the Bosnian Muslims, who were at that time mercilessly slaughtered. Now, when the war started out, I wasn't in Bosnia. I was actually in Croatia doing my studies. I started a year before the war. So throughout, I wasn't in Bosnia during the war. But like anybody who is a Bosnian and Bosniak especially, I felt deeply affected by the war, cut off from my family, sometimes not being able to hear from them for weeks and months. I eventually ended up in Malaysia on a scholarship and studied there at the International Islamic University, Malaysia. And after obtaining my bachelor and master's degrees in Islamic studies, I came to the United States for my PhD in political science. In terms of what I do currently, I am executive director of the Center for Islam in the Contemporary World at Shenandoah University in Virginia. The university is located in Winchester, which is about an hour and a half west of Washington, D.C., but our office is based at the Northern Virginia campus of the university, which is closer to D.C. and closer to the area where I live in Northern Virginia. We do research on various aspects of contemporary Islam. Just recently, we actually did a comprehensive survey of Muslim students in North America during COVID pandemic. And we published that on our website, which is www.contemporaryislam.org, contemporaryislam.org altogether. And we do many other things. We're now developing teacher training program for teachers in Islamic schools. We are developing research program on prophetic pedagogy, looking at the ways in which the prophets taught and formulated ideas, and what kind of pedagogical tools they used in interaction with their followers as well as with their adversaries. And we also have a number of different projects which would take a very long time, but that's not really the main theme now. So I would really advise everybody to go onto our website and learn more about the center and what we do.
Alhamdulillah. Now, we recently commemorated 25 years since the genocide took place in Bosnia. And it has affected the lives of the people there, the community there. We've been talking to women, children, survivors. What are your initial reflections on the genocide, the 25th years since this has passed? And how do you think Islamophobic tendencies have developed around the world since?
Yeah, so it's been a quarter century since the genocide in Srebrenica took place. But genocide in Srebrenica, this must be repeated, and I think should be known by anybody who wants to know more about what happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The genocide in Srebrenica was really a culmination of a 3.5-year-old long campaign of genocidal massacres against the Bosniak population of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Mainly by the Serbs, both from Serbia and from Bosnia itself, because Bosnia had, at the beginning of the war, about 31% of the population in Bosnia were Serbs, and about 43 to 44% were Bosniaks, or Muslims as they were known back then. And then we assumed our own national name, which is Bosniak. That is our historical name, because Muslim is a religious group, and Bosniak is an ethnic identity that we have. Not every Bosniak is a Muslim, though most Bosniaks are.
Okay.
And there are Muslims who are not Bosniaks. There are some Serbs and Croats who are Muslims. So, but they are in a small minority. So I think that culmination of the genocidal campaign against the Bosniak people was in the Srebrenica genocide, that horrible killing of more than 8,000 men and boys. And we are now at 25 years later. I think it's a good opportunity to kind of look back and think of what it really means for us today. I think for people of Bosnia, and especially for the Bosniaks, it means it's a story of a survival. It's a story of great suffering, but it's a story that's affirming the survival of the Bosniak people. As many of the survivors of the genocide like to post sometimes on social media, they said they thought we were weeds. They didn't realize we were seeds, you know. So they wanted to weed us out, to whack us, but we survived. And people of Srebrenica and people of Eastern Bosnia and people of Bosnia and Herzegovina survived that genocide. And there is this misconception that genocide only happens if everybody is killed. That is, of course, not true. We know from the Holocaust that, of course, there are many Jews who were killed in the during the World War II, and some of them survived. The fact that you have survivors doesn't mean that the genocide didn't take place. The genocide is established based on intentions. If somebody wants to eliminate a group of people simply because they belong to that group of people. And that was the intention of what happened in much of Bosnia, including in Srebrenica. So for the survivors...
I wanted to ask something at that point, too. And this is not, it didn't just happen at that point, 8,000 boys. This is historically has taken place where, and we've talked to other survivors about this, where their grandparents or their great grandparents would talk about, oh, they're coming to take us away again, or they're coming to hurt us again. So if you don't mind, if you could speak a little bit.
So this is connected to the presence of the Muslims, especially during the Ottoman time. In the Balkans. Obviously, when the Ottomans entered the Balkans and put that area under own political control. Some of the people who lived in that area converted to Islam. Many did not. As you know, the Ottomans did not have a policy of forced conversion or anything. If they did, pretty much everybody would have converted to Islam. Some people converted. But for those people who did not convert and who lived as non-Muslim subjects of the Ottomans, I think they had a lot of times very negative memories of that time. And so once when the Ottoman Empire started weakening and started retreating or was pushed to retreat from the Balkans, the Muslim population of the Balkans bore the brunt of the wrath of non-Muslim population there who felt that the Turks had either oppressed them or were not fair to them and so on. And so there started a 2 centuries long process of basically exterminating Muslims and pushing them out. There are some really interesting maps, which I do not have right now, but these maps show the presence of Muslims in the Balkans in the 18th and 19th century, and then the 20th century. And what we can see is that the areas in which Muslims lived shrank over the period of 2 centuries. So these campaigns of ethnic cleansing and genocide against Muslims of the Balkans did not start in 1992 and did not start in 1995. It started much earlier, and the result of that is that there is an intergenerational struggle and understanding that there had been intergenerational, you could say, war against extermination, ethnic cleansing of Muslims in that area. And so for that reason, you will find often people who would say, oh, I heard my grandfather telling me that they used to get slaughtered 50, 60, 70 years ago, and now the same thing is happening to us again. You had sometimes people from the same family, from the same Serb family, killing people from the same Muslim family across the generations. So it really is a big problem, and it has to do with this ideology of Greater Serbia and the ideology of you could call it ethnic and religious purity that some people in the Balkans have assumed. And in that narrative, the Muslims are really a foreign body that have to be eliminated. Even though ethnically we share the same ethnicity and language and look the same, and if you walk the streets of Sarajevo, you would never know just by looking at somebody if they're Bosniak or a Serb or a Croat. Even in spite of that, we're still seen often as a foreign body, and for that reason, we often have witnessed in history these kind of repeated massacres.
And so, as you see the rise of Islamophobia around the world, and you see genocides taking place in other parts of the world, and reflecting back on this quarter century commemoration, what are your thoughts?
Well, on the one hand, there is an encouragement, I would say, and the encouragement comes from the fact that pretty much all major international institutions have accepted the fact that genocide took place in Srebrenica.
Okay.
Major world leaders participated in the official 25th commemoration of Srebrenica genocide. This included, former U.S. President Bill Clinton, presidential candidate Joe Biden sent a message. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson sent a message. French President Macron, many others who had basically commented on the genocide in Srebrenica. So there is a widespread recognition that this historical event is really an important watershed mark in modern history of Europe. And it's something that needs to be commemorated, and it needs to be remembered. So that's, I would say, positive. There was a lot of writing in all types of international media, on social media, in major outlets, New York Times, The Guardian, Washington Post, everywhere. People were writing about genocide in Srebrenica. What was very encouraging to me, especially, was that we have a younger generation of Bosnian scholars and activists who are now writing for these major outlets and who are actually authoring. So we have now self-representation, perhaps for the first time in a long time in history, that Bosniaks have their own self-representation, which is, I think, extremely important for any group of people to be self-represented. It's nice when somebody else talks about genocide, Srebrenica, but I think it is so much more important when we have the Bosniaks themselves, and especially people who have members of their families, the survivors who were children at the time of the genocide and now are, professors at universities and leaders of NGOs, and they are writing about these things. I think that is very powerful.
Yes, that is something I noticed as well, alongside the fact that I also noticed that a lot of young American Muslims don't know about the genocide. So this was an absolutely incredible opportunity to educate, and for them to educate the population, and it was delightful to hear that in Europe, and especially in England, that they have made it such an concentrated effort to make sure that the memories don't die out. But in the United States and Canada, there doesn't seem to be, maybe around the world they might be, but here there wasn't this like a concentrated effort. And so this is something that we're noticing, that there's a gap, and perhaps next year and the years after that we need to really make some effort as an American Muslim community to make sure that this is not forgotten. And now, as we're talking, and part of that is let's talk about genocide denialism. Like this is what is that, and if you could explain that to the audience, and how does it impact Bosnians?
Yeah. Thank you so much. That, I think, is such an important aspect that I think we need to talk about. Before we just move to that question, if you would allow me, I am aware of the fact that many younger Muslims, and younger Americans in general, and Muslims in the United States do not really know much about war in Bosnia. They were born after the war ended. They might have heard here and there, but did not understand how important that event was for global Muslim community and for the consciousness that formed in global Muslim community. So what was encouraging was that just a few days ago, the House of Representatives introduced a resolution. This is the resolution, House Resolution 1045, 1045, which is now tabled in the House of Representatives of the U.S. Congress. And we need everyone's support for this resolution. So please write to your representative, call them, ask them to pass and support and co-sponsor this resolution. Again, this is House Resolution 1045, condemning the genocide, and I'm reading here, condemning the genocide and other crimes against the Bosniak community perpetrated by Bosnian Serb forces at Srebrenica in Bosnia and Herzegovina in July 1995. So this is a big deal in the House of Representatives of U.S. Congress.
Who introduced that resolution, if you don't mind? Who introduced the resolution? Who was the Congress?
The resolution was introduced by Representative, I will just give you in a moment, Eddie Bernice Johnson. She is the U.S. House Representative from Dallas, Texas.
Okay, that's excellent. So perhaps as Justice for All, as one part of our advocacy, that could be something that, thank you for letting us know that, and we're going to be on it. We'll put that out in the community.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I think this is very important. I'm going to also give you the link to it as well, and so you can share it also with our viewers, that anybody who is in the United States, who is a constituent, please contact your representative. It's very easy. Just with this link that we are sharing, you can click on Find Your Representative, and in 2 minutes you can submit an email. There is also a ready-made language if you want to support this resolution, and urge them to support it and pass it. So I wanted to share that. Now back to your question. Sorry, I digress, but I think this is such an important issue that
very important digression.
And we're really grateful that the U.S. government has often shown leadership in supporting these type of resolutions, in condemning genocide, and And related to that is this issue of denial. One of the reasons I think why we have this resolution in front of us is by Representative Johnson was because of the greater frequency of genocide denial both in Bosnia by Bosnian Serbs and in Serbia. So the first category of those who deny genocide that in Srebrenica in Bosnia took place are pretty much all political leaders of Serbia and political leaders of Bosnian Serbs. After the war ended, when the war ended in Bosnia, the Dayton Peace Agreement was signed that affirmed independence of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a country and as a member of the United Nations. Internally, it organized Bosnia into two, what they came to be known as entities, almost like two states within Bosnia and Herzegovina. One is called Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is majority Bosniak and Croat. And then there is a Republika Srpska, which is the area that is predominantly Serb in Bosnia. And then there is a small area which is called Brčko district. There was this one city in Bosnia that they couldn't agree on, and they basically decided to create it as separate district. So within Republika Srpska, the Serb-controlled part of Bosnia, that territory is pretty much result of ethnic cleansing and genocide. So before the war, that area was almost equally populated by Serbs and Bosniaks. After the war, it is 92% Serb. There are only a few percent Bosniaks left. And that shows that there was a sustained campaign to, within 3 years, eliminate almost all Bosniaks from that territory. Today, the leader of that Serb-led entity in Bosnia, Milorad Dodik, who is also a member of Bosnian presidency, is habitually denying that genocide took place. He said, yeah, there was a crime, there was a massacre, but it wasn't a genocide. What is interesting is that in 2004, the government of Republika Srpska, the Serb entity in Bosnia, actually passed a resolution that affirmed that genocide took place in Bosnia. But 3 years later, when Milorad Dodik became the leader of that entity, he basically started denying genocide, and then eventually the Bosnian Serb parliament decided to retract that admission. And last year they formed a new commission to sort of examine what really happened in Srebrenica. And it is mostly led by Serbian and Bosnian Serb academicians and politicians, with few Russians and a couple of Westerners just put in for good measure so that it appears that it's an international effort. But basically, the aim of that is to deny the genocide and to create doubts in people's mind that this ever took place. So that's one category, the Serbian politicians.
I guess someone is asking, one of our audience is asking, could it be argued that the elimination of Bosnian Muslims by Serbian politicians and military forces wasn't only done by killing humans, but also eradicating religious, cultural, and political presence?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Poljarevic, for your question. Absolutely. The erasure of Bosniaks was not only done by killing people, eliminating them, raping women, and other means of warfare, but it was also by systematic destruction of anything that is part of cultural heritage of the Bosniaks in Bosnia and Herzegovina, of any kind of Muslim heritage. So the mosques were destroyed, libraries. One of the most emblematic scenes of the Bosnian War was within the first few weeks of attacks on Sarajevo, the capital, the bombing of the old municipal city hall building that at that time housed our National Library. And about 2 million books were lost, many of which were manuscripts that go way back into centuries and basically prove that Bosnia existed as a country, and that that people lived there who had certain specific cultures and so on, not just Muslims, but many other people. And so it was a targeted effort to erase anything related to Bosnian statehood and anything related to Muslim heritage of Bosnia.
Okay. So
anything that had that kind of symbolism had to be completely eliminated, and this is what happened. So absolutely, I think some people have used the words such as culturicide, herbicide, and interestingly enough, and I think this is an important aspect of genocide in Bosnia, is eliticide.
Eliticide. Okay, what does that mean?
It means that in most towns and cities in which the Serbs were able to establish their military control, they actually had lists of all the important leaders in the Bosniak community. Okay. Political leaders, medical doctors, professors, teachers. They were the first people to be taken away and killed. Because the idea was, if you take the most educated, the best people in that, not the best, I mean, I don't want to sound elitist, but, you know, the leaders, people who have gravitas in the community, who have education, who have leadership skills, if you eliminate all of them, the rest of the people will be headless and they'll be very easy to deal with. That's actually what happened in many places. Medical doctors, teachers, professors, political leaders were immediately killed. And this was done systematically. They would go into the city, they would have the lists, printed lists with the names, and they would go door to door, pick these people, and then kill them. So this was a very planned type of execution and elimination and ethnic cleansing and genocide. And so eliticide is one of the words that had been used for this type of killing and massacre.
And rape as well, like the rape of so many women. Yes. That had to be systematic, that had to be planned ahead of time, because Absolutely. That it is impossible to, and for that, that was the first time that the United Nations and the United States said that rape is a tool of genocide.
It's considered a tool of warfare, absolutely, and of genocide too. I was on another panel just a few days ago, and one of the panelists said that one of the great contribution of Bosnian women survivors of these rapes was that they self-organized and they went to the international institutions, they went to the United Nations, they said, we demand justice, we demand that something be done about that. So it was really because the pressure by these formidably resilient Bosnian and Bosniak women who went to the international institutions and asked that this be recognized, that we now have in international law this notion that rape can be used as a form of warfare that can be used now for any, we hope it never gets used again, but we know that wars happen and these types of things happen, so we know that now there is a mechanism in international law that people can be prosecuted for this type of violation. So this was a contribution by the brave Bosniak women who survived rape, who self-organized, really without help of the state or anybody, who basically just said, we want justice. We want to do something about this. And they did. And that was their great contribution to the to international law.
Going back to that denialism, right? In Srebrenica, many state that the denialism begins with a message of the mayor. So the current mayor, like recently, the current mayor, Grujic, who has repeatedly said that while the killings of the Bosniaks were horrible crimes, no genocide took place because it was not the deliberate destruction of a people. And you hear this often in, and we were talking about this earlier. He's not the only one. It's politicians, this commission that has been set. Who else are you seeing, echoing these thoughts?
So, as I said, first category were Serbian politicians and leaders, and you could say many in Serbian community in Serbia and Bosnia too. Including current mayor of Srebrenica, who is a Serbian who denies that genocide took place, even though he probably drives past those huge cemeteries every single day. So that's the first category. The second category are leftists, leftist politicians and academics in throughout the world, but especially in the West, I would say. Why is that so? Well, for the leftist activists and politicians, they see Western imperialism as probably the biggest problem in international law and international community. And because the war in Bosnia ended with the NATO intervention against the Serbs, and because the war in Kosovo ended with NATO intervention against the Serbs, they see that as a part of Western imperialism. And for that reason, they say, well, this was all part of Western imperialist project. For that reason, we really cannot trust anything that comes out of Western institutions. And so they often engage in this denialism that leads them to deny that genocide took place. Some of them altogether deny that any massacres took place. Others would say, yeah, the massacres took place, but everybody was killing everybody, and the numbers were inflated by NATO and by America and by the UK because they are imperial forces, and that's what they do for their own reasons, and so on and so forth. So that's the second category. The third category are what you could call intellectuals and academicians in the West, some of whom might be leftist and some of whom might not be leftist. Like, for instance, the American academic Noam Chomsky, who is well known for a number of reasons, but he is on record that he had denied that genocide took place in Srebrenica. We have a recent Nobel Prize laureate, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, Peter Handke, who also denies that genocide took place in Srebrenica. There was a book that had been published by Jessica Stern from Boston University about Radovan Karadzic, who was the leader of the Bosnian Serbs during the war in Bosnia, and who basically is the highest Serb politician in Bosnia, to whom all the main orders and commands go back to, and who was the most responsible in many ways because of chain of command. He was at the top of the chain of command. Jessica Stern wrote a book about him. He is now in The Hague at the International Court in prison. And he had been found guilty of these crimes. I think he's now on appeal and waiting to see what's going to happen with the appeal. She wrote a book that was titled My War Criminal. My War Criminal.
Okay.
It's almost a term of endearment, right? She tried to say, no, I call him because he was, but it was, when you read some of the descriptions, it's almost like she was suffering from the Stockholm Syndrome. She often wrote about him in a very glowing ways, and that he is handsome and dashing and this and that. And
the Western academician has no ties to Bosnia whatsoever.
Who?
This academician that you're talking about, the professor?
She's an American academician that had written books about terrorism in general. So in a way, you could say, well, this is just one of the series of books on terrorists, and Radovan Karadzic is a terrorist or a war criminal. Yet when you read the book, there's almost like, it is almost as she's saying, yeah, I understand that the massacres took place, but when I talk to Karadzic, I can understand why the Serbs did it. They were afraid of the Muslims or something like that. And it was kind of like almost preemptive.
So that whole Islamophobia, anti-Muslim, that whole war on terror paradigm
exactly
projected onto a genocide. Wow.
Exactly. And so we come now to that final category, I would say, which is the category of these right-wingers throughout the world, the people who see immigrants in general, especially in Western societies, as problematic, as not really should not have place in Western societies, and especially Muslims are seen as problematic. And the massacre that took place, the terrorist attack on the mosque in New Zealand, was inspired in many ways by the Bosnian Serbs. The person who committed the massacre in the mosque in New Zealand, on the way to the mosque, he recorded himself. And as he is talking, you can hear in the background the Bosnian Serb music was playing. And the Bosnian Serb music was basically about cleansing the land from the Muslims and the Turks and the Bosniaks and what have you. So,
Can I share something with you right now? The same rhetoric is taking place in India right now.
exactly.
In fact, I'll just share a little something from my own self. Like I got a sort of like a death threat sent into my inbox where they had taken a picture of the New Zealand killer with that whole Bosnia in the background, and then sort of said, "Forgot this." And so it all like ties together.
Yeah.
This is the same ideology.
It is the same ideology like what we are seeing with BJP in India now and what is happening across India, but especially Kashmir is the most blatant example of that. And when I read what is going on there and the rhetoric that the Indian politicians are using against the Muslims, it is exactly how it was in Yugoslavia and in Serbia in the late 80s and the 90s. And this is a prelude often to a genocide. And so I'm really, really worried about the situation in India and in Kashmir because we've seen this happen before and we know what the outcome often is. I saw a question somebody asked about the book Endgame by David Rode. Yeah, it's a great book. David Rode was the first Western journalist who immediately after the massacres and genocide took place, he was actually informed that the US government had a satellite picture that showed mass graves where the Muslims and Bosniaks were buried. And he went to those places to examine, and he did find. He said, I was walking in a soccer field, and I saw a bone protruding from the ground, and I realized I was walking on the bodies. And so he wrote a book that actually won him a Pulitzer Prize, which is Endgame. It's a great book, and David Rode had testified many times, and he also was a member of the team that commemorated the 25th anniversary of the Srebrenica Genocide as well. So it is a great book, and I would highly recommend it. Obviously, it was written immediately after the war, so the information that was available there was much less than what came known later when many of the new graves were found and when all the investigation was done by international court. So I would also recommend that maybe an updated version of that book or another book that was written more recently. But I think that one is vivid because it happened immediately after. So it has that kind of raw feeling to it that I think is important for people to understand.
So, and as we're talking about this, what effect does this denial have on Bosnian community? What effect does it have on the people on the survivors?
It is, on the one hand, it is very difficult. Imagine somebody who's lost almost all members of their family, especially male members, and then has to actually go around to prove that this actually took place. You know that these people are not alive. You know that they are not part of your life. You know that your father, your uncle, your brothers are not alive any longer. You feel their absence every day. And then somehow you have to prove to others that they are absent because if they were not, then genocide did not take place. So you have to actually double down. One, you have to accept that they are gone. Second, you have to affirm that they are going in order to prove to others that they are gone. So it's really difficult emotionally, I would say, especially for the survivors of the genocide. But I think for the Bosnian community in general, in Bosnia and Herzegovina and abroad, obviously now many of us live in many countries around the world as a result of the war and, refugees and all of that. I think it is that we constantly have to prove that this thing took place. So we constantly have to reiterate same thing again and again. Even though these things had been proven time and again in International Court of Justice, International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, there are websites with all these verdicts against the leaders of the Serbs, Bosnian Serbs, military leaders, people who had been convicted of genocide, people who had been convicted of crimes against humanity, of massacres. These verdicts are hundreds of pages long with very detailed testimonies by witnesses, not only the survivors and Bosniaks, but also by Bosnian Serbs who have taken place. Some of these people had testified that they took place in these massacres. They said, yeah, we killed 1,000 people in one day or something like that. And these are all on record. These are very easy to find, one click away from everybody now in the internet age. And yet somehow, in spite of all that knowledge, and that these facts have been established beyond any doubt, perhaps better established than anything in recent history, with very strong evidentiary evidence, photographs, videos. I mean, we have videos of executions. And in spite of that, people still have to prove that this took place. It really is emotionally very difficult. So, but we live in this kind of post-age reality show, world.
And for that, like, what hurdles? One, that we know that this is also the last stage of genocide. Denial is the last stage. But
no, the triumphalism is actually one of the Bosnian researchers, Haris Halilovic, who is in Australia. He actually said denial is not the last stage of genocide, it is triumphalism. It is when people not just deny, but then they gloat. They said, yeah, we killed them and we did the good thing. Just today, Hannah, you would be interested to know, and I think our viewers would be interested to know, one of the murderers of people in Srebrenica was released from prison after serving his jail sentence.
Okay.
He went back to his hometown, which is just a few miles from Srebrenica, and he was welcomed by a huge number of Serbs who basically sang songs to him as a Serbian hero.
Oh, wow.
That's triumphalism. They're basically saying, you know what? You served your sentence, but this is your sacrifice for the greater good. We have won because you are now out and those people are gone forever. That's triumphalism.
That's and how does that rebuilding that country, rebuilding the society there, 25 years, how, what hurdles does that place practically for the people who are living there to this denialism? What hurdles does that place in the long run? And I know we talked to a young woman who was sharing with us that schools are still segregated. A lot of times neighbors are living next to each other, but not with each other.
No, almost insurmountable. Even today, that example, they say that most of the people who actually greeted this war criminal after he came out of jail were young people. These are people who were often born after the war. So they've been bred on this diet of lies and denials through the educational system that, again, is segregated. So the Serbs have their own system and they teach their own version of history and so on. Through the mass media, through their politicians, this is the reality that they know. And so they grow up. So actually, in many ways, it is much worse than it used to be, because I think at least it used to be that people would have various inputs, but now I think it's just that it's become a bubble in many ways. I wouldn't say that, I don't like to say I'm pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic by nature. I'm a very optimistic person by nature. But I think it will be very hard to establish any kind of reconciliation until such time when the Serbs are ready to basically face the reality of what happened, accept that the genocide was committed in their own name, in the name of the state in which they reside, in the name of the political parties and leaders that they believe in, and, interestingly enough, in the name of the church. The Serbian Orthodox Church had one of the worst roles of any religious communities in recent history, which is that it was fully on board with the Serbian political leadership throughout the war. And so pretty much all the massacres and genocide took place with the blessing of the Serbian Orthodox Church, until the realization comes in the leadership, political leadership, religious leadership, as well as educational system of the Serbian community in Bosnia and in Serbia, and they come really to terms with what happened and accept it. I don't think we can move forward with any reconciliation, because if somebody does not deny that something bad happened, they cannot even ask for forgiveness. You only ask for forgiveness when you realize you did something wrong. And you can't reconcile unless people ask for forgiveness. I think this is what many of the survivors are waiting for, but I think it's going to be a while before such forgiveness is forthcoming from the asking for forgiveness is coming for.
And so one aspect of this denial that we haven't explored yet that I'd like you to explore is that it's coming from within some Muslim quarters as well.
Absolutely. So actually, I just wrote a piece that I hope will be published soon on Sheikh Imran Hosein. He may be known to some people. He has a lot of books on eschatology of Islam, the end of times, the Akhir Zaman, Dajjal, and so on and so forth. But he often gives these interpretations in a way that does not really square with most of the classical authorities on these issues and comes with new interpretations that are far-fetched. Now, that's a separate issue. Why is this important is that somehow he ties the whole issue of the Balkans, the Ottomans, Serbs, Bosnia into this. And he also denies the genocide in Srebrenica. He says the massacre took place, people were killed mercilessly, but that wasn't a genocide. And he contradicts many of the verdicts by international courts, international criminal tribunals, who have established beyond any doubt that genocide took place in Srebrenica.
So what is his theory? The massacre took place. Why is it not a genocide? What, the intention wasn't there to kill because of faith?
He says in one of his explanations, he says, the genocide would be if all Serbian people wanted to kill all Bosnian people. And that didn't take place, so it's not a genocide. So he doesn't really understand the genocide. He doesn't understand international statutes and laws on genocide and how they're applied to this particular case. And he doesn't understand that there is beyond any shred of a doubt that there is a clear there are verdicts, multiple verdicts against Radislav Krstić, Ljubiša Beara, Ratko Mladić, Radovan Karadžić, all of which establish that genocide took place in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Srebrenica in particular. And he's denying that. Now, this is, I think, particularly painful for the Bosniak people in Bosnia and Herzegovina because, the vast majority of them are Muslims. And so if they see a Muslim scholar denying the genocide, they feel doubly attacked. One is the issue of genocide, another is why is this person, and to make things even worse, Sheikh Imran Hosein had appeared on Serbian TV making these claims. So in a way, instead of coming to us, providing comfort to us, he goes to those who committed these crimes and gives comfort to them. So that's highly problematic and very, very painful for the survivors.
Are there others in the Muslim world who also feel this way, or are these one-off voices?
I can't recall any particular names right now. I would assume that there might be some of a more kind of leftist orientation who would fall in that category of anti-imperialism that would come maybe from Muslim societies. But I think Sheikh Imran Hosein is emblematic because I think he's quite well known. He has hundreds of thousands of followers on YouTube. In some parts of the world, he's a big name, like in Malaysia, where he lived. I don't know if he still lives there, but I know he lived there for many years and he has a huge following there. I think it's highly problematic that a person like that is, on the one hand, being promoted as the authority in Islamic learning, and on the other is denying this undeniable fact that not only is undeniable from any point of view, human, international law, and so on, but is also extremely hurtful to a large group of Muslims in the Balkans.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this hour, what do you think human rights organizations and everyday citizens can do to stop this denial and also to make sure that something this terrible does not occur again?
So I think number one is education, really. You said earlier in our broadcast that many younger members in our community in America, I think in the world, do not know much about the war in Bosnia. You know, for those of us who grew up during that time, it is part of our lives. We will never forget something like that, right? But those who were born, they might have read here and there, but it doesn't occur to them how big this event was. So I think education is important. We have more than enough resources, from the International Court of Justice to International Criminal Tribunal. They all have websites with all the verdicts and everything is there. Many books had been written. I think education, number one. Number two, I think there has to be some sort of advocacy, constant reminder to our politicians, to our leaders, to constantly remember this. And I think this House Resolution 1045 that we just talked about is a good example of that. I think it came out as a part of advocacy by a group of Bosnians in Washington, D.C., who had managed to get several of our representatives in the Congress to sponsor this resolution. I think that is very important. So constantly repeating, constantly educating, writing, and then I think it would be very important to organize study tours to Bosnia, to Srebrenica, for people to help the NGOs like Srebrenica Memorial Center is doing a great job. You can find them online. If you just Google Srebrenica Memorial Center, you'll find it. They have a lot of materials there. I think this kind of things, and then outreach like what you are doing, bringing people to talk about it to our communities, so that we are constantly reminded of this, not simply to relive the past, but importantly to inform our future.
Exactly. One of the things that I think is missing from this is that educational, if we learn from the Jewish community, there's so many movies made about the Holocaust. There's so many books, children's books that are printed about the Holocaust, fiction that is written based on reality, that teaches people without being overt, without being like knocking it on their head. It's sort of, so this is something, that I feel like is missing from this puzzle and needs to be worked on. So that is something that I would definitely urge young Bosnians to perhaps write about, especially those living in the United States, to, make plays, write books, write children's books about this, about your family's journeys, even fiction about it, so that people can learn about the history.
Absolutely, I fully agree with you. There have been a few movies that had touched on the topic of Srebrenica, but we still don't have the movie, so to say, something that is like the Schindler's List, that talks about these horrible events that took place in the past, and we need something like that. I mean, Angelina Jolie made a movie In the Land of Milk and Honey that touches on the issue of, Bosnian war, and the issue especially of violence against women. And many Bosnian women were involved with that movie, and they were happy with the outcome and the product. There's also been movies that have been produced in Bosnia that have won international awards. I think those need to be promoted
and highlighted.
But I think we need more, and I absolutely agree with you. There have been some novels, there have been a lot of books, but I think we need much more to make it closer to the people to understand this.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Doctor, for being here and sharing your insights with us. Please look for his article that will be published on Muslim Matters, inshallah, by the end of the day. And thank you all for joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow with another Justice for All Now show on Muslim Network TV. Salam Alikum.
Salam Alikum.